Greetings all. Welcome back to another episode of the Coptimizer podcast. I have got the CEO of Performance Protocol on the line, Daniel Falk. Welcome back, sir.
Hey, thanks, Pat. It's great to be back. It's been a while.
It has been a while. And that's really why we wanted to get you on the show. It's time for an update. We need to know what's happening.
All
We're
right.
excited out here.
That is a big question, but I'll do my best to run through some of the highlights.
Yeah, what is going on in the world of performance coaching for law enforcement?
Yeah, so I don't think I don't want to say a whole lot has changed in a negative way. What I mean is that performance coaching has, I think, really started to catch on. And so any sentiments or thoughts that I would have, expressed, or I think some of the other coach and industry experts that have been on the show over the last year and a half, anything that they've expressed, I probably can't add to it in terms of, new thoughts or ideas. I think the big thing, though, is that you compare that concept where we were at 18, 24 months ago to now, and the paradigm shift is beginning. Some agencies are totally leaning in and embracing the idea and recognizing that, hey, if we expect different results, we're going to have to try and do something different. We can't keep on doing what we've always done. And I think as more people have been able to experience it firsthand and seen the fruits of what comes of really engaging with a coach in an effective manner, they become believers. And so from a product market fit perspective, there is absolutely a place in law enforcement for performance coaching. But I think more excitingly than that, what we're realizing is it's just a small piece of the puzzle. Since we last spoke, we were going all full steam ahead on coaching, recognizing that that's not the end all be all. That is one important element of really solving what is the human capital management crisis in law enforcement. Coaching is an amazing tool and medium to help activate behavioral change and instill long-term behavioral changes or mindset shifts in individuals, and in turn can impact the culture of an organization. But if we zoom even further out and look at the biggest challenges in policing right now, which is really recruiting and retention, keeping good people, happily and healthily engaged in this job for the long term, and simultaneously making the industry an attractive place for the next generation, coaching is an important part of it, but it's not the entire equation.
I'm gonna hashtag that HCMC, Human Capital Management Crisis. Did I get that right? Human Capital Management Crisis. I guess it all depends on how you say it, and that's it is a really appropriate expression, because we were in the same boat last year. We were in the same boat the year in the several years leading up to this, and just to touch on a few of the things that you said. Yeah, we had a lot of great guests on last year. We talked a lot about coaching, and I think universally the one thing that we all agreed upon was, whether it was in our discussions on the air or some of the private conversations that I had off the air, was that in policing, we still are struggling to differentiate between the concept of coaching and mentoring. And I know you and I talked a lot about that last year. So for anyone that wants to, if you're curious about that, go back and listen to the first episode or re-listen to it if you haven't listened to it. But I think it's probably worth just going back and talking about that for just a couple minutes, because I'm out on the road a lot. I'm meeting with chiefs and other leaders from around the country. I was just at a conference down in Kentucky last week, and I have these conversations with leaders, and I still get the same response. Like, people, when they're talking about coaching, they think it's, oh yeah, we do that. Well, explain your process to me. And what they explain to me is, well, we're mentoring. We use, and whether it's through the FTO program or something internal, we're making these leaps that are not necessarily accurate. Doesn't go into the core of driving individual performance. So maybe just take a couple minutes and talk about maybe your experiences when you're out on the road, but then also how you've try to explain this difference to leaders.
Yeah. Let's put it this way. The biggest difference between coaching and mentoring is the difference between sharing experiences and, leveraging personal advice versus being completely Socratic or letting that client, individual, et cetera, discover for themselves what they already know to be inherently true. And what I mean by that is in a mentoring engagement, the application is generally very specific around a particular piece of content, usually within vocational work, right? So in law enforcement, a great example of a mentoring program would be, hey, I'm, testing for a tactical position or some sort of other leadership position. I want to be mentored by somebody who is in my agency, who has already done what I am about to do and can give me some, really specific advice about the do's and don'ts of a particular topic. Absolutely nothing wrong with that. It has proven to be an effective model for the last 50 years, and people get tremendous value out of it. But again, I will emphasize that this is for specific use cases where it's a quasi, instructional learning type of experience sprinkled with heavy doses of, let me tell you when I did that, or here's what I observed. I'm basically putting my own opinions or perspective onto you, Pat, so that you might be able to avoid some of the pitfalls that I experienced or could do things better than I could. But I'm being pretty prescriptive in how I'm talking to you. I'm not really giving you a ton of space for you to figure out what's best. It's almost like you're coming to me as the oracle or the sage, and I'm going to give you some wisdom. Ultimately, what you choose to do with it is up to you, but it's really somebody's very educated opinion at the end of the day. Compare that with coaching, which is a completely different modality, which has absolutely nothing to do necessarily with one's particular vocation, right? You can be coached by a leadership coach or an executive coach, but it's going to be much more broad in its themes. So we're not going to get into the nitty gritty nuanced details and the names and identities of all the people involved. Instead, we're going to be looking at what are the big barriers that is preventing me from going to that next level or becoming a better version of myself. I don't want to get, too philosophical or psychological on this, but it's essentially the coach challenging my worldview and holding up the proverbial mirror and having me take a really hard look at myself and recognizing, if I'm not part of the solution, I might be part of the problem. Or no, maybe I'm not living up to my full potential, or I'm not meeting my personal expectations. It's somebody asking me very thought-provoking questions that's going to take me right up to the edge of my comfort zone and really start making me have the conversations that I should have been having out loud a long time ago. And as you can probably figure out, that is not going to be specific to just one particular silo of life. It's going to suddenly open up to all these different aspects of our personal and professional lives with the ultimate intention of making us a better human. Now, the application for this in law enforcement is that, hey, if we become better performing individuals, because let's not forget, we're a sworn officer when we're on shift 10 to 11 hours a day, but the rest of the day we are ourselves. We have an identity outside of just being an officer. And so if we can become a better functioning, higher performing human being in all aspects of life, that's obviously going to translate over into our ability to perform better on the job, regulate stress, critical decision making, all that kind of stuff. And now you start doing this at the masses, exponentially, and we now have a team of people who are thinking and performing better. That's obviously going to translate into a stronger, stickier, healthier organizational culture.
Yeah,
Pull that
I
thread
love
a little
that.
bit more.
That's a very succinct way. I mean, you could probably give us an hour lecture on a lot of the differences. One of the trends again that we've been seeing not just in the last year, but in particular, I've seen a lot of publications now addressing this issue because of the mass exodus that we've had in the profession with those that are eligible to retire and they're leaving. We have created a much younger workforce, and with that, we have young leaders where typically even in the mentoring role, like what you started to describe there, that's I think culturally how we've done it in law enforcement for decades. We promote people or give them additional responsibilities based on their technical and their tactical competencies. They do a job very well. but without any real thought as to what is this person like at their core and what type of leader will they be, and will they be able to lead others effectively? And that that goes back to that, that saying, right? If you always do what you always did, you always get what you always got. And you might have great success, but you might have also you might be perpetuating negativity within your culture for another generation by promoting the wrong person. So I love this concept again, not just for building performance, but also for building a strong organizational culture. Make sure that your leaders, your future leaders, are really doing those self-assessments and that they're maximizing their individual potential. And one of the episodes that I'll refer back to from last year was with Michael Irwin. He's a West Point grad. He's the founder of Team RWB, Red, White, and Blue. It's a veterans organization. Just a highly successful person. And the first book that he wrote was called Lead Yourself First. And he really talks in there, he really focuses on why it's important to have these moments of reflection where you look inward to see what you need to work on to improve, not outward, not, what can my police department do for me? What is my supervisor doing for me? What is the city doing for me? What is the state doing for me? But really kind of flip that in like, where do I fit in this equation? Am I being the best person that I can be in order to maximize those that are, the productivity and really just kind of the general happiness of those that are around me. Yeah, so that's pretty cool. All right, so I touched on it there, and just in terms of the workforce. So as you've been traveling around the country over the last year, what have your observations been in terms of agencies, recruitment, retention issues, and maybe tie in the next evolution of what we teased upon early in the podcast about recruitment and retention?
Sure. So on the retention side, I mean, it's grim. I have met pockets of agencies here and there that are doing a fantastic job and are, truly exemplary in how they're managing human capital. They don't have issues with retention. They don't have issues with recruiting. And these are not 7-person agencies. They're a couple hundred sworn. They're not the highest paying agencies in the area. There's something else going on. I talk about this a lot that, hey, if you look at millennial and Gen Z, top 3 priorities for employer selector across all industries, compensation is not in the top 3. The top 3 things have everything to do with, the culture, the vibe check, if you will, right? But basically, is it a fun place to work? Does it feel like a productive place to work? Am I around other colleagues that I actually can tolerate and, better yet, enjoy? And most importantly, do I feel like that there is actually room for growth? I don't want to be the proverbial hamster on the wheel, just spinning and spinning and spinning, but getting nowhere. These types of things, as you can see, are, totally related to the culture of the agency. That's going to help with morale, retention, and will create a very sticky culture, an infectious one. Don't get me wrong, Pat, compensation is tremendously important. But I think, anybody listening to this who has a career in law enforcement or is considering it, you didn't become a police officer because you wanted to become rich, right? You would be a day trader if that was your number one primary motivator. People who still get into this profession, even if you're Gen Z, despite any stereotypical misconceptions you might have about younger folks, those that are gravitating towards the industry are still doing it for reasons bigger than themselves, and it has nothing to do with money. You hear a lot of rhetoric around, the cost of living is going up, et cetera, et cetera. I can't deny that, and I don't have a solution for the grander economic, frictions that we're seeing in today's society. All I'm simply saying is that there are people out there who still want to get into this job for the right reasons, but there is a significant breakdown either in the recruiting process themselves that makes them realize, hey, I don't want to go to this agency, or there are internal cultural and or development issues within an agency that are contributing to the higher retention rates. And when I say higher retention rates, I won't throw any agency under the bus, but I've spoken to agencies of major cities that are, down upwards of 1,000 people, have more than 50% of their staff eligible to retire in the next 24 months. It's a scary situation. The same time, we're seeing still a heavy emphasis on the prioritization of lateral transfers. So literally poaching ourselves over getting new blood into the industry. And the agencies that I do see that are making significant investments into the recruiting side of things, they're going at it through an investment in what's called the top of funnel. So just the idea there is, hey, let's get as many people to apply as we possibly can. And it's a sheer numbers game. If we just get more applicants, we will therefore get more hires. And what that translates to is we're seeing agencies spend six figures upwards with marketing agencies, putting together hype videos, some social media posts. That's all good and well. There's nothing wrong with that, other than it's simply creating a top of funnel volume problem. But there's still a choke point in the funnel where we're not getting people who are necessarily qualified, right? It's just a free for all. Give me 3,000 applications and let's see what we whittle down to. There are extremely convoluted application processes. I have taken the time to actually apply to become a police officer at several different departments around the country, and I am just blown away at the complexity and convolution and just trying to submit an application to become an officer. I mean, some places. No, I haven't gotten a call back. I'm not kidding. There are places that have 200 plus questions. It's not mobile friendly. I can't do it on my phone at all. It's asking me really, really wild stuff. But then, like, you can go through all of that, but it never asked me, like, do I have a tattoo on my face? That's an instant disqualifier, right? So I'm going to go through all this rigmarole. Some agency is going to filter through this application and be like, wow, this guy actually had the patience to go through all of this. They've invested this time, money, energy on both parties only to have an instant disqualification. Same with this top of funnel stuff. There's a case study, again, the agency I won't mention, they spent $250,000 in 2022 on marketing videos. They got 3,000 additional applications. However, they only hired 87 at the end of all of that, which was not statistically any more than the years where they didn't spend $250,000 on marketing. So spending that type of money year after year to run marketing campaigns is not sustainable at an agency level, and it also does not equate to an increase in successful placements or hires.
Yeah, it just seems like you're creating more noise and actually making it more difficult for those that you're, entrusting with that important responsibility of recruitment. Because now you're just making because I doubt you're putting more manpower towards the effort because those are the first places where agencies generally pull from when you're short on the street, is we pull from administrative and desk functions, and then we assign collateral duty assignments to recruiting and background investigations. And now instead of giving them one person 10 quality applicants, we give them 100. And yeah, when you sit down and actually think about it, it doesn't make much sense at all.
So that's part of the problem. The other interesting thing that we've observed is we've started pulling agencies across the country and specifically getting some details and some stats around who are the recruiters, what is the process, and what is your level of competency, tooling, and training. And what we uncovered is across the nation, an overwhelming 86% of law enforcement recruiters have never received any sort of formal training on how to recruit. They've never received any sort of sales training, because let's be honest, recruiting is sales. It's really all it is.
Right.
92% are insecure or not comfortable with public speaking. And 98%, Pat, do not know how to conduct market research and or leverage tooling or technology to specifically target the types of personas they are looking for in the communities they're recruiting out of. So if you think about it, you've got people who don't have training in recruiting, don't know how to close deals or are successful at sales, are totally uncomfortable with public speaking or striking up conversations with new random people, especially, 22-year-old kids, and also don't know how to actually organize or run a CRM or an ATS to keep all of this stuff organized with follow-up campaigns, et cetera, right? I've met major city agencies that are running an entire recruiting effort, trying to hire, 1,200 people, and they're doing it on Microsoft Excel. That makes no sense. That is a failing recipe right there.
There's a first flag. If you're a leader or someone in law enforcement and you just heard these acronyms, ATS and CRM, and you don't know what they are, um, there's a class that Performance Protocol puts on. Like, let's just, there will be my first little tease for what we can talk about later. But yeah, yeah, man.
And Pat, my point here is not to just, complain and bring up more problems and say, oh, this is bad and this is bad and you should do this or whatever. I'm simply saying, hey, when we took some time to really look at the phenomenon of what was going on, the choke point was not that nobody wants to be a cop anymore, or that, oh yeah, the pay sucks or whatever. Agencies are very, very successful at getting a ton of eyes on them. There are people interested in this career, but there is a fundamental breakdown from the moment I make my first contact with an agency to when I get a contract. There's a lot of steps, a lot of processes that go into you got my attention to I'm signing on the dotted line. And it has a lot to do with recruiter competency and the tools, techniques, and training that they receive. And again, there are agencies out there that are doing a wonderful job. I'm not criticizing anybody who hasn't gone through this training. I'm simply empathizing with them that, damn, it's got to be extremely difficult when your only instruction was, okay, here's a cell phone, go get me 100 people. I need them tomorrow. Well,
Yeah.
shit, what do you expect? So the solution in my mind is, how do we proactively invest in the training and tooling of our law enforcement recruiters and making them play nicely with HR, because that can be a fundamental friction point for a lot of agencies. There's a lot of bureaucracy, no surprise, in the hiring of government employees, but that doesn't mean it still can't come with a high level of quality control standards and be a streamlined and contemporary process.
Yeah, so I want to touch on a couple of things. So if you go back now, right? So you threw out a couple of stats there that I thought were really important to reiterate. 86%. Yeah, that was the 86% have never received any training, any formal training on how to recruit.
Right.
So if you combine that with the fact that nobody becomes a police officer because they want to become a recruiter, they become a police officer because they want to go fight crime and help people and do the things that we expect. But there are these responsibilities that inside organizations that we have to fill in order to maintain and build for the future. And one is you always have to be looking for the future about bringing in the best quality employees that you can. And so historically, the way we've done that is, well, we need to give somebody a development opportunity. So we're going to take Officer Smith and Jones from the street crimes unit because they're really good at arresting criminals. So let's go make them recruiters. And they have no marketing background. They have no sales background. Their whole life has been, their passion has led them to work in the street and being really good at those things. And now we're going to move them into a completely different environment, not give them any training, give them some expectations. And then when they fall flat, we're going to blame Smith and Jones and not ourselves as a management team and a leadership because we put them in a position to fail. I've talked about that a lot, right? And you can apply that to a lot of different things, but we call it the fundamental attribution error, where we blame people for systems problems. And so, yeah, so there's one. And then
Well,
90, what was your stat on 98% again? Remind me on that one.
that do not use any sort of market research to identify the types of personnel they're looking for in the communities they're recruiting out of.
So we're going to spend a shit ton of money. That's a lot, by the way. That's my own, a shit metric ton of money to try to fix a problem that really, and again, I don't have really any problem with making those attempts, but oftentimes, can these companies that are providing these services, just like you say, I mean, it's one thing getting that top of funnel, increasing the number of applicants, X number of percent. But if that's not converting, then it's really not beneficial. So it's really just kind of money down the drain.
Yeah, in a sense it is. And to your point around, taking, your ass kickers and high performers and saying, congratulations, you're now in recruiting. it's it's not a bad idea, um, because you look, you want to have your recruiters be the men and women that the next generation looks up to and wants to aspire to be, right? You need to have Ken and Barbie being your recruiters. If you've got somebody who's grumpy and frumpy, right, and they're the recruiter, I don't want to be like you. Hell no. I'm going to go be a YouTuber, dude, because you look miserable. But more often than not, people that are in, who have gotten this recruiting position are not necessarily the fitting the identity that younger people are going to want to grow up to become someday, and that is blunt and harsh and probably offends some people, but it's also just absolute truth. um
Yeah, I mean, you've got to be really intentional about who the face of your organization is going to be. And you also have to ensure that you are delivering what the message that you want them to be bringing to potential candidates. Like, this is our organization, this is our culture, this is what you can do for us. Um, Interestingly enough, and I got into a conversation because I was listening to another podcast last year, and they were talking about the armed forces. The armed forces is having very similar issues. Um, the number of qualified applicants is declining. The number of applicants that can pass a physical fitness assessment is declining. The number of people that can pass a criminal background assessment is declining. So you have these increasing trends in a decreasing pool, which doesn't, and law enforcement is in the same boat. But there is one exception. There's one exception to of those the five branches in the armed services, including the Coast Guard. One is meeting their recruiting goals every single year, and that's the United States Marine Corps. And if you think about it, well, it makes sense, because in short, the Marine Corps puts out there, this is who we are, this is our purpose, and if you're good enough, maybe someday we'll allow you to come stand on this wall with us and you can be a part of our organization, but only if you're good enough. And so where the other services have kind of started making exceptions, and it's kind of a race to the bottom in order to bring in these numbers, they took a different approach, or they've maintained, it's probably better to say they've maintained the same approach that they've always had. And I think in policing, we are tricking or fooling ourselves into believing that we can lower standards, we can change standards, and that's going to somehow bring us better applicants.
yeah, I don't follow that logic, but you are right in that the Marine Corps has done a fantastic job of being highly aspirational. And I think that's, I don't know much about that industry, but I do believe that that is probably a fundamental part of how they're able to, not have the same friction they're seeing, in recruiting that we're seeing in other public safety sectors.
Yeah, so I think that's part of it. It would be, and again, I could talk ad nauseum about this, right? I think we do need to go back and be more mission oriented in terms of telling people what they can expect from this type of career and really what we're looking for, and excite them about the job. And so, I don't fault agencies for going out. I did it multiple times myself. You develop recruiting videos that you can promote what your agency stands for, and you show the opportunities that are available to people that are maybe interested in the profession. But even then, and I did have a filmmaker come on this past year, the episode with Jason Doty. We talked a lot about that, and I got some really interesting perspectives from him. When I first contracted with him to come and do our first video, and the first thing he did was get on the internet and start doing market research. he was he came back to me a couple weeks later and was like, "Oh my gosh, I don't know if I should be terrified about doing this project or excited, because I see some pretty crazy things out there." And ultimately, and this is just coming from he's a trained observer, right? That's what screenwriters do. That's what producers do. And he was just like, my observations as this neutral and detached party were like, we're prioritizing all of these things that seem to run counter to what the public's expectation is for what the police is, and we highlight like a 1 or 2% fraction of what policing really is in America. So I thought we did some pretty cool stuff with our video, but hey, I digress.
Well, in any case, Pat, all I can tell you is that it has been an interesting year of research to really dive into what are some of the friction points we see on the recruiting side. And the more, the more that we got into it, all of the common excuses or complaints that we were hearing were really, really surface level and didn't yield a lot of truth to them. Are millennials and Gen Z built different than your generation? For sure they are. And like it or not, they represent the future of policing. And at some point, I think we need to stop making jokes about participation trophies and living at home and all of this nonsense, and either leaning into and saying, okay, if we really care about the future of public safety and law enforcement broadly, what do we need to do to adapt and change? I've heard all of the jokes. Some of them are funny, some of them are true, but ultimately it's counterproductive. It's also been very interesting to look at the research and organizational development more broadly, particularly around folks under 30 and what their motivations are for employment selection. Law enforcement has a much better chance at being a world-class institution for employment across this country. I truly believe that the onus of responsibility falls on the industry, though, to modernize a lot of archaic processes, and some of which are not complex. Get rid of 200 questions in an application, have a dedicated landing page to apply, streamline some of these very convoluted and outdated processes with HR. This is not a lowering of standards or, making exceptions for, niche cases. It's really just you're trying to hire 1,000 people on Excel. I successfully submitted an application to a major city agency over 3 months ago, and I still haven't even gotten an email, text message, or callback. And even if they don't want to hire me, which is fine, the fact that there was no nurturing along this way, like, dude, I got to pay my bills and put food on the table for my family. I don't have time to wait 9 months to then be told, maybe let's now start this elongated process of going through the hiring. And I see it simultaneously. We hosted a recruiting boot camp event. It was a 2-day on-site boot camp here at our headquarters building, and we had 11 agencies from around the state come, and it was a really deep dive course. We had HR, managers, specialists, and then dedicated recruiters from some agencies. But most of these recruiters, Pat, were fractional at best. And I'm talking to one of the guys, and he's like, "Look, we're 60 people down. We're an agency of 200, and I am the only sniper for the SWAT team. I have to do patrol. It was like 3 other things that this guy has to do. And he's also, guess what, responsible for recruiting." And I asked him, okay, so how much of your time per week can you really focus on recruiting? You guys are stretched thin, right? And he said, honestly, maybe 90 minutes. I can do maybe 90 minutes a week on a good week to dedicate my time and attention to recruiting. That is a systemic problem. Like, it's not that dude's fault. He's not he was actually fit the Ken mold, right? He was somebody that you would want to look up to. He's trying to do everything he can, but he's got all these other responsibilities. He can't get buy-in from the powers that be to say, hey, maybe we should invest some more time and energy into solving our recruiting process. It was just like, I don't even know how to put into words what I was experiencing, other than my heart went out for this guy. Like, damn, that is a real tall order and a tough gig.
Yeah, and here's the important thing to consider. So for anyone that's listening to this, and the fact that they're not solving it, next month he may only have 80 minutes because they're down 65 officers, or in the next few months. And this is something I try to stress in this, with everybody that I speak with, and this applies to a lot of things within policing, right? This is why I think that approach to developing the officer right from the day that they walk in the door, and like you said, creating that path and showing them what a career can look like and motivating them towards that, but then giving them the resources to actually develop. If you don't do that, then you're swimming upstream. It's like swimming against a riptide. You can only do it for so long and survive. Eventually you're going under. And I think that's what we're seeing. And then as we go under, we're trying to fill these voids with just another body trying to do with the same old approach, ineffective.
That's part of it. I mean, the other mentality we see a lot is I am 65 people down today, therefore I must hire 65 people. There is no hardly ever. In fact, I don't think I've met an agency yet that does any sort of staffing forecast, right? If you run any business of any size, you're always forecasting two things, right? Your P&L and your staffing. And you don't, it's, yes, it's important to know like where I'm at today and possibly tomorrow, but I need to also know where I'm at next year, the next 2 years, 5 years. And that is really, really true for recruiting at a company of any scale. And it's no different to an agency of, quite frankly, any size. We spend so much time focusing on the needs for today that we're not thinking about our recruiting efforts 5 years from now. I told you a little bit earlier in this interview that, hey, I've met countless agencies that are going to be in a really scary position in the next 18 to 24 months where more than 50% of their personnel is eligible to retire. It doesn't mean they're all going to walk out at once, but what it does mean is that if they're disgruntled, if the culture sucks, if there's another super controversial, George Floyd style incident, people are going to say, F this dude, I'm out of here, pay me, and I'm going to do something else. And then you will see a mass exodus at once. So that statistic I said is often used as a little bit of fear mongering, but there is some truth behind it that we're just one critical incident away from people saying, I'm done with this. And so if we're not thinking about, okay, hey, that's a real possibility amongst my staff, or holy smokes, 60% of my personnel are 12-year plus and, are going to be thinking about a career change at some point, that should be ringing alarm bells saying, what do I need to do to invest in my people to keep them here and get a couple more good years of productivity out of them in a healthy and sustainable way? And what am I doing to make sure that I've got a long waiting list and backlog of people that are putting their hands up interested in my agency? I have yet to see that.
I like that point, like to do it in a healthy and sustainable way, because, obviously one of my passions has been health and wellness. And, sadly we're seeing, some pretty dire numbers when it comes to longevity, just in terms of quality of life. And, that's another reason that again, the calls for service aren't going away. In fact, they're in most cases, we may see national crime trends show that they're actually dipping, but that's a little misleading because we've undergone by mandate of the federal government, we're switching from uniform crime reports over to what they call NIBRS, a national incident-based reporting system. So the classifications are a little bit different. And the general media and other people don't understand those little nuances. And I think, again, as a profession, we don't do a good job explaining those differences. So we're kind of seeing it's kind of wishful thinking. Like we see the data that we want to see and ignore the rest. Well, I don't necessarily agree that crime universally is dropping. I think we're just seeing a shift in what's happening. So the demand for services are still there, even if they're flatlined. Let's just be kind of fair and say maybe they're flatlined with a decreasing work population available to handle those calls. That puts more pressure on your existing workforce, which then stretches them individually from, from a quality of life perspective. So these are, it is such a complex issue. And you're right. I do think leaders have to take a look at this in a new light and be willing to take a step back and say, hey, somebody show us what we're doing wrong, or show us what other industries are doing to combat this. Because on top of all of this, we just have a declining age group within that population as well. That 21 to 35 age group, that's a shrinking population base in the US.
Well, consider this too, Pat. You know, I don't know about the crime statistics up or down, but I do know that calls for service are not stopping and are increasing, whether it's armed robbery or my cat stuck in a tree, right? I think ultimately what we're seeing, I think you'll agree with me at least, is that 90+% of policing is really a customer service role. And I don't mean that in a belittling sense. I just mean that, most calls for service are not, a car chase and a shootout. It's citizens requiring or are in need of some sort of assistance, right? It is a customer service role, even if it's just somebody got spooked and they need somebody to talk to, right?
Absolutely.
That's what it is. Now, you have been, and I'm sure anybody listening to this has been in a position, whether, a good example is parenting. Like if you come home from a super stressful day's work, you're already kind of at the breaking point, you're overworked, and something super benign can just set you off, right? You stub your toe or your kid spills something on the carpet and you just lose it. Like that's the straw that broke the camel's back. When you got officers that are under a tremendous amount of stress, they're already kind of disgruntled, they're questioning if I still want to be here, they're questioning the industry, right? They're carrying around a lot of this emotional baggage with no release valve. Now they're showing up for calls for service and they're going to be impatient. They're going to be viewing the situation through the glass being half empty. I've done plenty of ride-alongs and I've seen these, the call screens come in, and it's just, that gives me anxiety. You can't ever clear that thing. It just keeps coming in. And so it's so easy to put this piece together and be like, holy smokes, it's no wonder we're not having a better customer service out in the field because we've got people overworked, spread too thin, et cetera, et cetera. It's one of the many facets that, I think contributes to the cultural degradation within an agency. It makes recruiting the next gen less enticing, right? If I go on a ride along and I'm thinking about working for this agency and I see this dude just yelling at the computer screen because it's like these fucking calls won't stop coming, and I'm being, very short with somebody who is clearly in need of help, that also sends me a certain message. Maybe I don't want to do this. Maybe this job sucks, right? There are ways to get around that. And it's not singing kumbaya. It's starting with, hey, how do we develop that emotional regulation in that officer? How do we give them a release valve? I won't go into the whole spiel around how we're able to do that, other than I'll simply say we've been able to move the needle significantly for officers who 3, 4, 5 months ago were not only thinking of quitting, but would just generally be disgruntled or cynical. We're able to turn that around. And what does that equate to? Better quality service, better relationships with our community. I've said this before, all relationships are a two-way street. And the relationship between law enforcement and the community at large is like any other. The community at large, and in a lot of cases, has made up their current opinion on what they think of law enforcement. And so there again, the onus of responsibility falls back on the industry to try and change that perception. Just like customer service scores in any other business, even if it's crappy today, it can be reversed and improved. It's not a dead end street.
Yeah. So yeah, and it's clear that all these things are interrelated. So let's go back now to the seminar that you ran, and I'd like to maybe just take a couple minutes and maybe talk a little about what specifically are you looking to build in the attendees that come in, and again maybe a few more lessons of what you learned, because I think those were the most important thing is like you can't expect miracles from somebody, and when you put them into a recruiting position, that's not going to work.
No, this is not a silver bullet. But what we are offering with our boot camps is essentially taking an individual who feels like they are kind of hamstrung in their ability to successfully recruit for whatever external excuse or reason they can come up with. And what we will do is start by breaking down that mindset or that negative limiting thinking. And then from there, move into 12 curated modules specific to law enforcement recruiting. And that covers everything, including some of those stats I listed off around how do you become a more effective and persuasive communicator? How can you overcome objections? How do you shift from, quote, fishing to hunting when it comes to applicant identification, leveraging tooling and technology to conduct, actual tangible market research in the communities and demographics that you're choosing to hire from? How do we inject a higher level of diversity into the profession? And by diversity, I don't just mean, the proverbial rainbow, but literally, hey, diversity of skill sets, ages, experiences, education, like all the different things that really make up a diverse and thriving, workforce. We look at I think I mentioned objection handling, and then some other things that I won't give away the entire lot here. You'll have to attend the course to really get it, Pat. The idea here is that, hey, at the end of these 2 days, you walk away with a foundational set of knowledge that helps agencies become completely sustainable and self-sufficient in recruiting, so that they can take the budget that they have been dumping into promo videos and YouTube ads and all that stuff. It's great, but this is about quality over quantity right now. I would way rather hire one rock star new hire than 10 mediocre average duds, half of which are likely to quit in the first 2 years. It's a stupid return on investment. So how do we get hyper focused around what we're looking for and get people successfully hired while shrinking the time from contact to contract?
Yeah.
That's what it's all about.
Yeah, then that's awesome, because that also reminded me, and again, and this was our philosophy as well, right? We didn't want to make a bad hire. And so we were willing to leave a spot vacant until we found the right person, because again, it's a lot different than in many civilian job sector positions. Like take, for example, one of my sons, he was in the service and now he's going to college, and he's got a job. He works for a we'll just call it a parcel delivery service. So so he drives around, drops off packages, and that's what he does when he's not in school. And I was just asking him about the recruitment process, what kind of screening they went through, the training, and because I was just curious, right? And what I discovered was that the processes were way more efficient than I know a lot of law enforcement organizations are using. So their funnel is specifically designed to get to the people that they know are going to be successful in what they want them to do. Like, here's the task. It's not real complicated. And I know law enforcement obviously is a little bit different, but the turnaround time for that from application to getting hired to going on your first training session, you're talking, anywhere from like 14 to 28 days. In policing, if it's an 18-month turnaround. If you do it really fast, you can probably recruit and hire somebody in 3 to 6 months just to get them hired. And now you're looking at a 12-month window to train them. So if like you're saying, if within the first year or two, they decide, you know what, this isn't for me, I didn't really know what I was getting myself into, and then they quit, you're not, I mean, you're down 24 months. I mean, that's because now you got to go through that whole process. And because the way budgeting works, if I'm allotted a staff of 150, I can't, and I'm doing forecasting, and I let's just say I am being proactive, and I do know that 20% of my workforce is eligible to retire. So I want to bring people in and get them trained because I know it's going to take 12 to 18 months. Well, yeah, I can't hire them if I don't have a position. So what generally happens in organizations, we wait till that position is vacant, and then we start the process to hire. So 20 to 30 years of experience walks out the door. 24 months later, I replace that person with someone that has zero experience. And now I've got to build them up at that trajectory. So there's a lot of room for improvement.
Well, that's a great example of how doing a simple forecasting analysis could have easily solved for that, to, essentially eliminate that lag time between the onboarding of that new individual and the outgoing. I mean, that it's not rocket science to be able to predict how likely it is that somebody, based on their tenure, personality, et cetera, like how long they're going to be with an agency. It sounds like a, auto magic, whatever, but it's really not. It's quite easy to do. And so that's a great way to solve that type of problem. Your other point around, you have somebody who goes into the academy, or they start their training, and then, they kind of fizzle out or burn out or whatever. Other industries solve for that by having, very robust mentoring and or coaching programs or something to keep those people motivated, inspired, and engaged. For anybody who's like, well, I didn't have that when I did it and I toughed it out, that's great. That's really great. Again, you can make whatever comments you want, but if you want to look at what the private sector is doing and why they win the war on talent, it's because they truly, truly care and proactively invest in human capital management.
I'm sorry, but real
Yeah.
quick, because the other thing that I know is always front and center is, well, like any leader is going to ask, how much does this cost? How much does this cost? And what I'm trying to get people to understand is, like, nothing is for free, right? These services are going to cost money, but I would say that when you look at the ROI, you can't afford not to invest in these kinds of programs, because going back to those numbers I was talking about, depending on which state you're in, like, you're looking at $120,000 to $150,000 for that first year salary for a new employee. And then it's generally going to be, somewhere around that, is when you think about the benefits and everything that you're paying out on top of salary, the cost of having an employee. If you turn over one extra person a year, because you didn't invest in coaching, because you didn't run your recruiting program in the most effective way possible, you've already spent 10 times the amount of money that a program like this is going to cost. So, and this is maybe a sales pitch for you, I guess, but people, you have to look at, when you're doing these forecasting, right? It's not just about bodies; it is about budgets, and it is about money and cost, and it's responsible to spend money in an effective way. That's what taxpayers expect. They want us, to be good stewards of the taxpayer dollar. And I would say, by not having these programs, we're not being good stewards. And we do have to evolve with modern practices and things that we know are going to help develop our workforce. So there's a little sales pitch for you.
No, you're spot on. It's overwhelmingly ironic how expensive the cost of doing nothing truly is. So well said. Pat, I want to talk about something very exciting here. I've rattled off a bunch of different stats. I've said that we spent, the last year and a half doing tremendous amount of nationwide market research. And we have created something that we're calling the American Law Enforcement National Recruitment and Retention Scorecard. And I am bringing this up as a free to use tool and resource for any law enforcement leader, HR specialist, or recruiter, as essentially a way for them to score themselves and their agency against the national average on, I think it's like 15 or 16 different key metrics when it comes to human capital management, employee retention, and recruitment. And essentially what we have done is taken industry market research that we've conducted, third-party academic publication around human capital management in law enforcement, and then more broadly, organizational development research over the last 10 years, looking at generational trends and preferences in recruiting and hiring. And what we've done is compiled this into a scorecard where, if I'm a chief or I'm, head of recruiting for my department, it's a 10-minute, survey asking me a variety of different questions around, do you have a full-time recruiter or part-time recruiter? How many sworn are you? Do you have X, Y, and Z, right? Pretty easy to do. But what it's going to do is it's going to give you in real time, spit out a score and a very detailed report on where do you stack up against the competition, right? Are you ahead of the curve? Do you need to catch up, or are you kind of falling behind? And it's brutally honest, but that's what we all need if we want to get better. But it will in real time say, hey, in X, Y, and Z metrics, you're doing better than average. But in these domains over here, there's a lot of work to do, and here's what that means, and here are some ways to fix it. So I would encourage anybody who is in the industry to take a look at this thing and give it a go. It's completely confidential and it's 100% free. Pat, I'll share the link with you, and you can post the podcast here after we record it. But I think it's a really interesting expose into what the current, climate is across the country, and an opportunity for, anybody in the industry to get a very unbiased snapshot of the good, bad, and the ugly, and how they're doing in human capital management.
Yeah, that's really cool. I'm glad you brought that up because, one of the things that I did when I took over as chief in my organization back in 2012 is I did a complete cultural assessment study. I had a professor from Purdue University and their School of Management come in, and we did a complete assessment, 360-degree assessments, and assess the organizational culture. And we did it when I was getting ready to retire as well. And you learn a lot from that, right? Because we think, we make assumptions a lot, right? Well, there's only so much time in a day, and it's hard to keep track of everything. But there are professionals and there are people that do have the answers that we need. We just have to allow ourselves the opportunity to go and say it's okay to go do something like this. And you can't be afraid to do an assessment because you're worried about what the findings might be. And I would assume a lot of people know intuitively our processes are not good. And now I'm going to go take this survey and it's just going to tell me how bad they really are. And now I'm going to know it. So it would be easy to maybe not do it just based on that. But I would challenge anyone listening. If you have that thought in your head, that's even more reason to lean into this and then go do it because you can't fix something if you don't know what's broke. So you got to get in there, get that assessment. And this is from uh, coming from an organization. And again, and that probably ties into my one quick question I had too was when we put together these best practices on recruitment and retention, what were, I guess, top of mind for you and at Performance Protocol when you were trying to decide who is it that we want to do this? Like where are these industry standards coming from? So as a law enforcement leader, when they hear this, they can trust that like, hey, this information is solid. It may be new to law enforcement, but it's not new to the industry, into the private sector.
Yeah, so when it comes to best practices, we're leaning very heavily on what we're seeing work, both from the U.S. military, specifically the Navy, as well as Fortune 500 companies. So publicly available information, publicly traded stock companies. Clearly, both have a tremendous track record of being successful when it comes to human capital management. Some employers may have higher turnover and they're not going to necessarily be all shining stars on the retention front. There are some companies that do a fantastic job that are Fortune 500. There are some that have, gotten some slack in the media recently for, morale or retention issues, but none of them have demonstrated any sort of issues or friction points when it comes to being an attractive place to work or on the hiring side. And so whether it is how to leverage technology to do market research, whether it is shortening the time from contact to contract, if it is training, recruiting, or HR personnel to highlight the key features and benefits of working for us versus the competition, all of that stuff is backed by 35 plus years of organizational development research, peer reviewed in third party journals. So this isn't me just pulling stuff out of thin air and saying this sounds good. These are what industry experts are not only seeing and observing, but are actually demonstrating out in real time in the field. What we're doing is making this applicable and digestible for law enforcement and identifying areas of improvement or where we might need to tweak and modify based on the constraints or nuances of this particular industry.
So you mentioned that you hosted it there in your headquarters. Is this something that people have to come to you for, or can you take the show on the road?
No, we do it in two flavors. So we offer a general multi-agency group experience, which is what we hosted here. So we do this in major cities around the country, where we will identify a large location. Multiple agencies in a geographic region are invited for a 2-day on-site in-person experience. These boot camp experiences are much more around mindset and, quite frankly, a little bit more broad, only because there will be such a diverse set of different agencies in there. But it's a great foundational standing point or start off point for, okay, I've got a pretty good sense of, at a 30,000 foot level, what I can do differently. And I'm already walking away with some tangible skills and, hard copy material that I can start implementing tomorrow when I'm back at the office. Ultimately, though, if an agency wants to get really, really deep and super specific to their particular needs, wants, and desires, we would then conduct an on-site, 2 to 3 day audit and personalized boot camp. And I know that word audit can sometimes be, trigger some anxious feeling. But, this isn't like the IRS auditing you. This is really us just having a very frank and factual conversation and discovery around, hey, what's working for you guys? What do you want to improve? What tools and resources do you have available? Who are the other stakeholders involved? Walk me through the whole experience. And now let's break this down and see, basically what the good, bad, and the ugly is. From there, we can take that information and segue into a 2 day deep dive training experience that will take our 12 core modules, but it will all be reswizzled and customized through the lens of what we discovered in our auditing process. So that we now go from, generic stuff, which is good. But if you really want to have the rubber hit the road and you really want to move the needle on recruiting, we have to make it custom tailored. So it's a long way of saying we do both. Most agencies will start off with this group experience, also because it's fun and it's a great networking opportunity. You get out of the office for a couple of days, so it's a good time. You do learn some stuff, and then from there, most agencies will segue into, okay, I need to go 3 levels deeper. Let's bring this in-house. What can you guys do on site for us exclusively?
Yeah, that's awesome. So I mean, it's no surprise to anyone that's listening to this, right? I was a CrossFit affiliate owner for years. I still train in a lot of different modalities. I still do CrossFit. I do Spartan racing. I do a lot of this stuff. But one of the things that we ran into a lot when I was an affiliate owner was I would literally have people tell me like, "Hey, I know I'm overweight and out of shape. And I really want to do CrossFit, but I'm going to go get in shape a little bit first before I come." People would tell me that, and because they were a little bit intimidated by the process or what they were going to get themselves, really what they were setting themselves up for. And so I would always say, hey, look, if I can give you one piece of advice, and it doesn't matter if you come to my gym or you go to somebody else's gym, I would really encourage you to actually flip that process. Um, Go work with a trainer, come into this gym, let us walk you through what we know works, because it's worked. We've replicated this with others. Instead of going and doing trial and error learning on your own, which is a very ineffective way to try to learn, let us teach you. Do it. You come here for 3 months and then go work out on your own, because now you've at least got a good foundation. So I love this concept of starting with this survey that's going to give you kind of a self-assessment, right? Just like you would if you go to your doctor for your annual physical, you find out, hey, my blood sugar's high, I've gained weight, my blood pressure is creeping up. What do I need to do? So now we've got a good understanding of where we are. Next best step is I got to find someone that can help me build a good plan that's going to work for me. Not what's going to work for my neighbor, but what's going to work for me. So that's why I like that customization, finding out what's working for you. And then lastly, and maybe you chime in here, but it seems to me that if this is if we're going to call this a crisis in policing, which I certainly think it is, and this is I think nationwide, if you ask most chiefs, they're going to tell you this is their number one priority. Then I do think, if not the chief, it's got to be somebody high in that leadership position that attends these boot camps and workshops with their recruiters, so they understand the process of what's going on, so they can help them in terms of implementing the lessons learned and the programs that you're going to, because sometimes you can, if you have someone that's in middle management in an organization, they can have great ideas, but if the top level leadership doesn't buy in or doesn't believe it or doesn't quite understand what they're trying to do, that's going to create friction, and it may lead to things falling by the wayside. So this is just me speaking from experience, from things that I did well and things that I did not do well. I would say, hey, you always need to trust your people, pick the best people that you can, but you need to be a part of the process as much as possible as well.
No, I think that's well said. In fact, I had a conversation with one of our participants here last week who was he was the head sergeant over recruiting for his agency, and he, said straight to my face, "This is fantastic stuff. When I bring this back to my chief and my command staff, they will not listen to me because they don't want to hear what I have to say." So he explicitly asked us to come and explain to him basically and just speak on his behalf, which I thought was unfortunate and spoke very strongly to some cultural problems within that agency. But I digress. I would agree with you, Pat, that that's probably not a unique phenomenon that I just explained. And I think to the extent that leaders and command staff can, take a vested interest and get involved in this, it's all the better. I realize a lot of these guys and gals don't have necessarily 2 full days to commit to it, which is why we offer a 2-hour executive crash course that covers this at a high level, really focusing on just a mindset shift so that in 2 weeks from now, when your subordinates come and brief you on this, you're not only informed, but you're already mentally bought in.
Yeah, that's really important. And I guess in defensive administrations here, in defensive chiefs, sometimes, and again, either way, it's still the chief's responsibility. If you have a frontline supervisor that already has that block, you're right. That is, whether they're right or wrong, it doesn't matter. That's a barrier that a chief has to overcome, whether it's because that officer doesn't believe he's going to be heard or because he won't be heard. Either way, it's going to lead to failure. So you have to address it. Yeah, that's exciting stuff. That's exciting stuff. I'm really now I'm already thinking about, next year and being able to review and hear how the process is going, and what type of participation and from around the country that you're getting, and quite frankly, what are we learning from it?
Well, thanks, Pat. I look forward to hopefully having even greater news for you next year.
All right. Is there anything that I've asked you? I know we're already at like an hour and 15 minutes. Is there anything that I haven't asked that we needed to cover?
No, I think that's good. Maybe just do like a final plug for the scorecard and then do your standard closeout, and I'll say thanks.
Right on. Well, I think I love this concept of the scorecard, of course, but I'm a numbers guy. I can't help it. Numbers don't tell the whole story. I get it, people. But we're in the people business. We really have to focus on our officers. We have to resource them appropriately. We can't expect them to perform miracles. And yeah, so I love it's it seems like this is evolving in hindsight. It seems kind of like like a very logical progression, and it's almost like, man, why didn't I think about this years ago? But that's generally the way the best ideas often unfold, right?
It's always 2020, and you can't really figure it out until you spend a lot of time in the trenches.
All right. Well, that's all I got. This is pretty exciting stuff. The on the coaching front, I know you've onboarded a lot of new agencies. There's a lot of people that are really starting to appreciate and understand the difference between coaching and mentoring. So it's exciting to see that. Yeah, I think 2024 is shaping up to be a good year.
I think so too, Pat. Thanks for having me on. It's always a pleasure.
All right. Well, we'll put the link in the show notes, but if you go to www.performance-protocol.com, that'll take you to the webpage, and we'll have a direct link up on the show notes when this goes live as well. But that's all I got. Thanks for spending some of your valuable time with us, Daniel, and thanks to our audience for spending their valuable time with us. It really does mean a lot, and I'm excited about the future of policing and what you're bringing to it. And I do appreciate people like you that do take the time and invest your passions and your energies into helping those of us in public safety, because I know there's other things that you could be doing as well, but we really do appreciate it. So last shout out to you. And then until the next time, everybody, we'll be 1042.